We are going to talk today about this whole myth that says, oh, boys will be boys, and you know, it's all good. You just have to expect boys to act less aware of social everything than girls. Well, I have problems with that on a number of reasons, and I actually, so yesterday I discovered, I think his name is James Breakwell, and he's a comedian. I will have to double check that, but he goes on Twitter by Exploding Unicorn. He has 4 little girls, I think. He has 4 children, I think they're all girls, and he tweets the most hilarious stuff that his kids say. And I actually posted one of his collages, collections with some of the super funny stuff yesterday because, you know what? I needed to laugh. After the month this has been, oh my goodness, I needed to laugh. So I posted that from Exploding Unicorn on Twitter. And one of the funny one was his 5-year-old, she says, hey daddy, why can't I bring dogs to school? Why won't they let dogs in school? And he's like, honey, they're animals. And she's like, well, they let boys in. Duh, I don't understand. So even at 5, a little girl thinks, well, you know, they don't let dogs in school. They let boys in school. Dogs are animals. Boys are stinky and smelly and whatever. So it just cracked me up. But I couldn't help but think that this stereotype starts really, really young. That girls and boys have 2 different sets of standards as to what is expected of them. And you know what? That is what I want to talk about today, because when we talk about healthy relationships, emotional intelligence, when we talk about sexual responsibility, when we talk about abuse and abuse recovery, you know what? There are definitely 2 different standards typically applied to men and women in society. And that is just not okay when you're looking at it from a biblical, faith-driven, gospel-oriented point of view. So, this whole idea that boys will just be boys, you know, I wanted to read a note that a quote, actually, I made it in a note from one of my favorite internet authors. Her name is Ann Voskamp. So Ann, shout out to you for this. This is something she actually posted at least a couple of years ago. I'm not sure when it was originally written, but I'm going to read it to you from Ann. These are not my words. These are Ann Voskamp's words. Real manhood never objectifies women. Real manhood edifies women. Real men don't get drunk, and a man can get drunk on a lot more than alcohol. Men get drunk on power, on control, on ego, on status, and they lose more than all inhibition. They lose the way. They lose their own souls. Men drunk on anything can destroy everything, and real manhood thirsts for right living. Real men stand up to change culture. They don't silently go along with culture. That in a culture where it's the tendency to bend, to be silent, to look the other way, to do what everyone else is doing, real men stand. That in situations where there's the tendency to look the other way, real men look for help. That when there is a unified front of silence on abuse, real men rightly divide the truth and unify to protect the abused. Real men take responsibility for their own bodies, but they don't take advantage of the availability of any woman's body. No woman is responsible for a man's irresponsibility, infidelity, or criminality. Real men are response-able, able to respond to women with respect, esteem, and honor. This is a real man's job. Real men never pressure women, but treasure women. No one tries to crush a diamond, because pressuring, coercing, bullying, harassing, demeaning, assaulting any woman, it means you're not a real man. You're the sexual mafia, and those need to be stopped. The thing is, real manhood means you hallow womanhood. A woman isn't a toy to amuse lust, a thing to aggrandize ego, a trophy to adorn manhood. A woman is a brilliant mind to engage, a visionary with dreams and ideas and talents to elevate, and a body that demands holy respect. Bottom line, and here is where I got the title for today, any culture, anywhere, that says boys will be boys is saying girls will be garbage. And every single one of us were, men and women for sure, made for a whole world more than this. Ann Voskamp has an incredible way with words. So I want to talk about that whole idea that when we say boys will be boys, the implication of that is that girls will be garbage. And I agree with her because it means that girls will be treated like garbage. But I also want to point out another way of looking at it, and that is, if we're saying boys will be boys, then we're saying only girls will be good humans. Because the implication of boys will be boys is an insult to masculinity. The implication of boys will be boys is that boys, and by extension men, are incapable of controlling themselves, of regulating themselves, of mastering their own urges, and that women are the only ones capable of emotional responsibility, physical responsibility, and so on and so forth. And so, I chose this t-shirt. It's one of my favorites to wear for this video. Raise good humans. Such a goal. Motherhood goals right there. Raise good humans. But that isn't raise good girls, and that isn't boys will be boys. That is boys and girls together are called by God to be good humans, to treat each other well. And I believe that neither gender is exempt from the call to moral decency, honor, and respect. I reject that. I more than do not buy into it. I actively reject the myth that only women can be good, responsible humans and boys will just be boys. Because when we say boys will be boys, that is the fully logical implication that if we take it all the way down through. On the other hand, here's the flip side of that. And this is why I think today's boys and young men get so much confusion. There's so much mixed messages. And yes, I know girls get mixed messages. Girls get mixed messages, women get mixed messages. I've talked about that in other videos. I'll talk about that more in other videos. And so nobody get on the page and start hating that I am not doing an equal and balanced side-by-side rundown for boys and girls in the same video. I cover both topics, different videos. Go get one of those videos if you want to have someone talk about women. I do that too. I talk to women a lot. Today, we're talking about boys and men. So just putting that out there, forestalling the internet trolls. On the other hand, hey, if you're an internet troll and you want to get all hot and bothered on my page and post and tag all your friends about how you disagree with that, go right ahead. Thank you for boosting my views. You can do that too. I don't mind. But still, seriously, this video is about boys and men. So here's the flip side, coming back to that, is that on one hand, we have this whole message, boys will be boys, and boys cannot be expected to hold high standards for themselves. But on the other hand, we have this culture that expects boys to act like girls. Yes, you heard me right. So when we have the boys will be boys mentality, but at the same time, when it comes to education, schools, classrooms, ways of learning, we want boys to sit down, be silent, shut up, be still, don't move, don't wiggle, and learn like a girl. Is it any wonder that boys continue failing at higher and higher rates while girls are doing better and better in school? Now, do I think we should not be educating our girls? Do not misquote me. Of course I don't think that. I absolutely think all of our girls and women should have as much education as they wish to pursue. And so, again, I feel like because of all the internet trolls, I have to forestall those who would like to take one soundbite and twist it. But the fact remains, and hey, I have a son and a daughter. The fact remains, boys and girls learn differently. They're motivated differently. They play differently. And yes, we're all different on a spectrum, Some boys are very soft and gentle and compassionate, and some boys love to play with dolls, and that is totally okay. And some girls love to play with trucks, and that is totally okay. I happen to have a daughter who is all the things. She is tiara, tutu, and combat boots, swinging in a tree, stomping in mud puddles, and burping her dolly. So she's all of the things. She keeps up with her brother, can beat up the boys if she wants to, and loves frills and ruffles and lace and girly girls and pink and purple and all the things. I have a son who loves science and nerdy stuff and reading, and sits there and tells me, my body may be a kid, but mommy, my brain is like a grown-up. I don't like stuff normal kids like. He also has Asperger's. Both my kids are on the spectrum. They're unique, they're different. So I am not boxing boys into one box and girls into the other, but I'd be lying if I said that somehow we can raise and train and teach and motivate and play with boys and girls exactly the same. They're different. God created us different, and that is a good thing. So while we're culturally telling our boys will be boys, you do not really have to answer for your actions, and we're telling girls, you can be anything you want to be, reach for the stars, but you know what? If you mess up, we're really gonna hold you to the fire. At the same time, we're not teaching our boys the way they need to be taught, and we're not helping them learn the way they learn best. So it's no wonder. And mixed in all with all of that is the general stereotype, and there are some parents who don't do this, I get that, but the general stereotype that teaching boys to be strong includes telling them to put a lid on their emotions and bang the corker down tight. Just push it down. Don't cry. Don't show emotion. Boys are strong. Be a man. Don't shed a tear. Well, you know what? I loved the quote that my friend Kyla posted from Lelia Schott. And she says, if tearful little boys were comforted instead of shamed, maybe there wouldn't be so many angry men struggling to express and empathize with their emotions. So we have all these mixed messages. Sit still, don't cry, be strong, boys will be boys, do whatever you want. And in all of that, to add another layer, we mix in this whole idea that, I should probably phrase it differently. There's this there's this societal stereotype that boys don't need touch. And so as boys grow out of toddlerhood and they grow into young manhood, boyhood and young manhood, nobody touches them anymore. All touch becomes sexually oriented. And there's an entire multiple generations of young boys, middle boys, and men that have not been allowed to be involved in healthy platonic touch that is not rough and tumble, sports oriented, like attacking kind of touch, aggressive touch, that's what I should say, or sexual touch. So you have this whole generation of boys who have been dissected away from their emotions. They're starving for healthy platonic touch that's non-sexual, and they're living without deep emotional connectedness. And anytime they do have emotions, they're told to shove it, stuff it, push it away. It's no wonder that we have men who grow up and they feel that their only acceptable types of emotional outlet are anger, hostility, and aggression. And then we wonder what's wrong with our men generationally. Now, again, disclaimer. Do I believe that all men are like this? Of course. You can stop hashtagging, not all men, don't lump me in with that. I know that there are plenty of men who are still in the minority, socially speaking, population speaking, but there are plenty of men who did not have this experience, who are in touch with their emotions, who do enjoy healthy touch, there's platonic and non-sexual, and who aren't isolated and disconnected and dissected away from their emotions. So Yes, they exist. You exist. I have friends who are absolutely in that category of healthy, emotionally balanced, responsible men. But you know what? I'm talking to the generational stereotypes at large. So if the shoe fits, wear it. If not, be glad it doesn't fit, okay? So I believe, especially as a parent who is raising a son and a daughter, and I want both my son and my daughter to be healthy, balanced, aware, emotionally intelligent individuals. I believe that when we go to the Bible, when we go to our faith, when we go to scripture and God's word, that there are answers to this. And when it comes to boys, that the goal is not to teach them to be conquerors. The goal is not to teach them to be macho. The goal is not to teach them to be strong, but to teach them, she loves my bookcase. I love my bookcase too. Thank you very much. Totally derailed. You know what? That is not the first time that has happened to me when I am on a live video and someone loves my bookcase. My bookcase is, it's like my boyfriend. It's just, yeah. Anyway, moving on. My bookcase is better than a boyfriend. What am I talking about? So yeah, where was I? Somebody help me out here. Oh yeah, goals. So our goal is to help our young boys and young men grow into men of honor and valor. Men who would rather go to the stake than do something wrong that they know is against their conscience. This reminds me of one of the poems that I memorized when I was about 11 years old. God, give us men. A time like this demands strong minds, great hearts, true faith, and ready hands. And that's from Josiah, Gilbert, Holland. I'll post the whole thing. I'm not going to recite it all right now. So how do we raise boys to be men of valor and men of honor? It starts with learning self-regulation. Teaching our boys to master themselves. Self-regulation, that means mastering their thoughts, their feelings, and their action. This chart shows how all of our actions start with our thoughts. You plant a thought, you reap a feeling. You plant a feeling, you reap an action. You plant an action, you reap a habit. You plant a habit, you reap a character. You plant a character and you reap a destiny. Your thought garden leads all the way around the wheel to our destiny. When we teach children, boys and girls, but not just girls, because we tend to teach our girls better on these things than we teach our boys. When we teach our boys to become men who regulate their thoughts, which regulates their feelings, which regulates their actions and their habits and their characters and their destinies, we are raising men of honor and valor. Men who have the capacity to control themselves and to use the power that they have to protect others. Every sense of power that God has given us, all power coming from God, is power that is intended to be used to protect, not to exploit. Any power that is used to exploit or to dominate others for our own gain is power that is not being used or given by God. Power that we have is always to be used to protect. So if we are teaching our boys to use their power, to use their strength, to use their personalities to protect others, we are equipping them to become men of valor and honor. Next, men of self-control. Now, I want to show some scriptures actually with this. So if you have a Bible or if you have a notebook, turn to Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. Philippians 4:8 says, brothers and sisters, fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Verse 9, and then the peace of God will be, the God of peace will be with you. So this does not say, now women, Be true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Be excellent and worthy of praise, girls. It says brothers and sisters. Being emotionally intelligent, being kind and self-regulated and self-controlled, and being in charge of one's thoughts instead of captive to one's feelings and urges is not something that women have a monopoly on. It is something that is equally applied in the gospel to men and women. Now, Proverbs chapter 16, verse 32, when we talk about raising boys to become men of valor and men of honor, the next thing that is hugely important is self-control. And so Proverbs chapter 16, verse 32. Wait. 16:32? Yes, I was looking at verse 33. It is better to be patient than to be powerful. It is better to have self-control than to conquer a city. So let's just step back from that. When we have sons, when we're giving them recreation, when we're teaching them sports, when they're playing video games, when they're watching movies, when they're doing any of those things, what are we teaching them? Are we teaching them that conquering is what makes them a man? Are we teaching them that power is what makes them masculine and they feel manly and strong because they have conquered and they have power? What are the games that they're playing? What is their entertainment teaching them and impressing over and over again? Is it teaching them that patience is manly and strong? Is it teaching them that self-control is better than powerful conquering? Or is it teaching them the opposite? Because see, we all are susceptible, not just to what our parents say, but to the messages that come from our entertainment, from our movies, from our games, from the stuff we watch, from the things we play, from the friends, from the stuff we do. And I tell you what, if you're kids, if you're teenagers, if you're a grown man, and your entertainment is focused on power and conquering, you are giving yourself the wrong message about masculinity. You're giving your kids the wrong message about masculinity. Bible says, the scriptures say, that it is better to be patient, that's where strength is, and self-controlled than to be powerful and conquering. And that is not speaking to women. That's speaking to all humans. That's including men. Another one, if you flip over from Proverbs 16:32 to Proverbs 25, verse 28. Here's another one, Proverbs 25, verse 28. A person without self-control is like a city with broken down walls. If we don't have self-control, if we don't teach our boys to have self-control, if we tell them that we're just fine with them just being boys will be boys, they're growing up into men who have no boundaries. They're growing up into men who are like a city with broken down walls. Anybody can come in. Anything can flow out. There's no protection. There's no barriers between themselves and the evil that is outside. It's just free flowing. And we are raising them to be men who exploit society and who are exploited by society in turn. Being emotionally... Oh my goodness, I wrote it down in here somewhere. Where did I write it down? I wrote it down in my notes. Doop, 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 doop. Oh, yeah, telling boys to be strong and don't cry and don't be don't be connected to their emotions. That doesn't make them strong. It makes them emotionally constipated. It doesn't make them channel their feelings into healthy action. It doesn't make them stand strong for right. It just makes them bottled up and explosive. There is no female monopoly on being a good human. So, more. We talked about expression of emotions. Teaching boys to be men of honor and valor includes teaching them to have empathy for the emotions of others. That comes more naturally to some boys than it does to others. But you know what? It also comes naturally more to some girls than it does to others. The thing is, we're all selfish naturally as humans, and we all have pride, and we all want people to take care of us instead of us taking care of other people. And so the idea of being focused on empathy and connected with the feelings of others is something that we all have to cultivate. But here's the thing. Have you ever watched sweet little boys feel so bad for something, a little bird that died, or their puppy when he gets hurt, or another child who's been hurt, and other people come along and they say, hey, man up, don't cry. Men don't do that. So it's not that little boys aren't born naturally with empathy. It's that we shut it down. We stunt it. We shove it back and say, don't come out into the sunshine again. And then we wonder why, when we're in relationships with grown men, that there's emotional constipation that is equated with masculinity and this lack of empathy and this abusive patterns and all of these things that come flowing out. And all of a sudden women want men to be more emotionally connected again. Well, it starts when we shove those feelings down in our little boys. So if we give our little boys freedom, one, to feel and connect and channel in healthy ways their emotion, if we encourage their empathy, then we are helping them grow up to be empathic, emotionally balanced, healthy men who can connect in deep ways that don't drive all their feelings just into sexuality or sexual addiction or sexual touch and then cutting off everything else. So on the other hand, we completely lost my train of thought, so I'm going to pick up something else. Another thing that I think I've seen just popping up in the comments here on the video, and that is that we confuse the idea of strength with conquering others instead of seeing strength and courage as conquering oneself. The most powerful form of strength and courage for any man is to master himself, to conquer his own selfishness. When a man has been taught to conquer others instead of conquering himself, that's when the foundation is laid for abusive patterns of behavior in the future. So if you are a parent of boys that, or even teenagers, and if you're a man listening to this, I would love to know your thoughts and responses on this whole concept, because I truly believe that if we start with our sons defining strength as conquering oneself, as mastering one's own self-regulation, as living with an awareness that I need to regulate my feelings, I need to submit my feelings to my rational thinking, I need to be controlled and disciplined for myself, rather than defining strength as conquering those outside of me and making them do what I want in a power-driven context, that we would dramatically change the nature of our entire societal generations, and this whole idea that boys will just be boys and they cannot be held accountable for emotional intelligence or empathy or kindness or the real form of courage that includes mastering oneself. Another thing, and this is the last main point, that is teaching our boys about consent. Now, I recently had a conversation with my own children about consent. And consent is a hard thing for children to grasp, boys and girls, often. Now, maybe your kids are different than mine, but mine very easily blow right past other people's boundaries because they are just focused on what they want, and they're like one-track minded, tunnel vision. This is what I need to do. I need to do it right now, and I want this, and I want this, and I want this, and it's just the natural, selfish, human, childish heart. And so I have a monumental task as their mom to help them conquer themselves so that they don't steamroll every other human in their circle. And so we were talking about consent, and I believe that there's a lot more capacity for men to understand consent than they would like to admit, but it starts with teaching our boys and our girls from a very young age. I think that girls need to learn, and boys, about consent in two directions. One, the importance of receiving consent from someone else, and two, the importance that if someone violates your consent, you have every right to set a firm boundary and do what it takes to not let that happen again, instead of feeling that you don't have a voice. And that also takes intentional cultivation from a young age. So we talked about what people feel like when consent is violated. So we just said consent being violated makes people feel what? Fear. How do people react when they're afraid? Well, they said, we might fight back. Okay, and what if you don't fight back? We run away. Exactly, you've nailed 2 out of the 3, fight and flight. What's the third one? And they couldn't think of it. And I said, freeze. Fight, flight, and freeze. Because you know what? There are so many young people and even adults that blame themselves for things that have happened to them because they didn't know freeze was an actual trauma option. That's a fear response, legitimate fear response. So teaching children from a very young age, if someone does not respect your boundaries, there are 3 possible ways that you might react, and the same person might react in any of those 3 ways in any different circumstance. Just because you reacted with fighting back right now doesn't mean that you will fight back another time. You might run away another time. You might freeze up another time, and that's okay. You still come and tell mommy about it. You still come talk about it. You find help about it. So helping them understand the concept of how people react when consent has been violated, when they feel fear, and then what is consent? So I just use the straight word because we use real words for real things in our house. I use the straight word and I just said consent means giving permission. Now, so then they got out pieces of paper and we made a bubble chart of the things they came up with. So consent is the word at the top, and we have yes and no. And what responses might mean yes? Oh, and they thought of all kinds of things. Yes means yes. Good job. Okay means yes. Sure, I'd like to means yes. Now, what things might mean no? Because I will be honest, my children, probably your children, often, and many grown-ups I know, often have a hard time understanding that there are 100 ways to say no. There's all kinds of different ways to say and those are not consent. Silence is not consent. I'll think about it. That's a no. Wait, also not consent. Maybe later, also not consent. No, I don't want to. Not consent. Not consent. So we did this whole bubble chart and they wrote them all down, and now we have this context where we can say, hey, did she give you consent for that? Did your brother really say yes to that? Are you respecting his consent or her consent? And say, no, I'm not. Okay, stop violating his boundaries and go make it right. You know, like I said, we use big words for things in my house. Maybe you don't in your house, but if you are open to it, I would encourage you to do that, because in today's world, there is no room for children to grow up not knowing how to respond to this, with the ways that children and young women and young men and even adults often are taken advantage of and take advantage of each other. Knowing these terms is an empowerment tool for young children. My children are 7 and 8, going on 36 and 42, but whatever. But I would say even as young as 3 or 4 years old, you can start using terms like consent. Did they give you permission? Did they say yes? No means no. Those are very young concepts that children can grasp. I see a note on there that says also body language and facial expressions are very, very important. I completely agree with you. Both of my kids are on the autism spectrum, so understanding facial cues tends to be much harder for them. But if you have children who are not on the spectrum and children who are of different ages, helping them learn to notice body language and what that has to mean as far as the subliminal, the subtext, that is also extremely important. I want to recommend a book. If you are raising boys, planning to raise boys, or are a man who wishes you'd been raised differently as a boy, the book Raising a Modern Day Knight is fabulous. Highly recommend it. And when we talk about back to the whole idea that emotional intelligence is not a feminine monopoly, I want to make sure that I am expressing this video not in a way that slams masculinity or that shames men in any way, because I mean, I'm raising a son and I want him to be a godly, self-controlled leader among men. I also want the same thing for my daughter in a feminine context. I want her to do whatever God calls her to do, and I don't care what it is as long as she does it with a clean conscience and a missionary heart. That is my goal for both of my children. But as we are talking about men and the emotional health of masculinity, I've been reading a book recently called The Emotionally Healthy Church. And it specifically addresses how if we are emotionally stunted, if we are emotionally constipated, we cannot reach spiritual maturity. We will be flowing out our emotional issues, our stuntedness, our inability to connect with other people in our church, in our home and family, in our faith community, in our work environment, and we will be damaging other people. So it is so important for men and women, but in today's video context, specifically for men and boys, to be willing to reach out and seek greater emotional intelligence. I want to talk about here, last a couple of verses, when we're talking about being emotionally healthy, especially for men who are spiritual leaders. 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 2 is a great one. 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 2. So a church leader must be a man whose life is above reproach. He must be faithful to his wife. That means he is not sexually liberated in the sense that he is exploring his sexuality in pornography, outside of his marriage, or flirtatious with other women. He is a faithful man. He must exercise self-control. He must live wisely. That means his feelings are submitted to the dominance of his thinking, his rational choices. He must have a good reputation. He must enjoy having guests in his home. In other words, he's not isolated and he's not he's not a hermit. He's open to being with people and ministering to them, and he must be able to teach. He must not be a drinker or be violent. He must be gentle, not quarrelsome, and must not love money. Now, tell me how those terms define masculinity compared to today. The ones that really stand out to me is that his life must be above reproach. There's no boys will be boys excuse clause on this. He is sexually faithful and emotionally faithful. He is hospitable. He is gentle. And he's humble when it comes to his money. Those are the exact opposite of how society today tends to define masculinity. So when we define masculinity as macho, flashy, big money, fast cars, lots of women, and aggressive and physically dominant, we are describing the exact opposite of what 1 Timothy 3 is saying makes a good Christian man and a biblical or a church leader. Now, flip over to Titus chapter 2, verse 2. Titus 2:2. Here's another one. Teach the older men to exercise self-control. This is teach the older men, not just the younger men. Teach the older men, because back then, apparently, older men didn't come pre-installed with this hardware either. That's okay. We're all humans. We all have to learn no matter what age we are. Teach the older men to exercise self-control, to be worthy of respect, and to live wisely. They must have sound faith and be filled with love and patience. NLT, New Living Translation. That's Titus chapter 2, verse 3. Again, describing the ideal man, the older men, maturity and masculinity as being someone who is filled with respect, love, patience, and self-control. Now, 3 more verses. Galatians chapter 5, verse 23. Here's another one. Just so that you know, I'm not sitting here pontificating from a female point of view about how I think men all over the world need to change up their ways. I'm talking about how we need to redefine our understanding of masculine strength, whether you are an adult man or you are a parent teaching your little boy. We need to redefine it based on God's word, not on mixed messages from the world. So Galatians chapter 5, verse 23, the Holy Spirit produces this kind of fruit in our lives: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Notice, it does not say the Holy Spirit tells women to have love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. It's speaking to all humans. Men too, to have goodness, gentleness, love, patience, and kindness. Now, just above this, here's the contrast. And this is the standard that the world sets, particularly for masculinity. Following the desires of your sinful nature, the results are very clear: sexual immorality, impurity, lustful pleasures, idolatry, sorcery, hostility, quarreling, jealousy, outbursts of anger, selfish ambition, dissension, division, envy, drunkenness, wild parties, and other sins like these. Anyone living that sort of life will not inherit the kingdom of God. So here we have a contrast. We have an outline of what honestly is straight up Hollywood, secular society, and all of the world around us, how its masculinity is defined, contrasted against meekness, kindness, goodness, gentleness, and self-control as how God's men should act. The standard that is set is that of conquering oneself, not conquering those around you. 2 more verses, 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 13. 1 Peter 1:13 says, prepare your minds for action and exercise self-control. Put all your hope in the gracious salvation that will come to you when Jesus Christ is revealed to the world. Prepare your minds for action and exercise self-control. Another one that is not aimed at women, it's aimed at all humans. And 2 Peter, next book, last text, 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 6. Actually, I'm going to read verses 5 through 7. In view of all this, make every effort to respond to God's promises. Supplement your faith with a generous provision of moral excellence, and moral excellence with knowledge, and knowledge with self-control, and self-control with patient endurance, and patient endurance with godliness, and godliness with brotherly affection, and brotherly affection with love for everyone. The more you grow like this, verse 8, the more productive and useful you will be in your knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. But those who fail, here, verse 9 is good too, but those who fail to develop in this way are short-sighted or blind, forgetting that they have been cleansed from their old sins. So when we talk about the whole myth of boys will be boys, I truly believe that it is a colossal insult and honestly a scheme of the devil to deconstruct genuine masculine strength, to tear down good solid, strong, courageous manhood. And instead of giving boys a free pass on morality and saying boys will be boys, while also educating them in a way that is probably often best suited for girls, I think we should do these things instead. Let boys feel their emotions. And when your young sons are feeling their emotions, let them talk. Before puberty hits, when they stop talking, don't shut them out. Let them talk to you. Let them tell you. Let them cry with you. Let them feel someone else's pain and praise them for it. Let them feel their emotions. 2, let boys be boys. Not boys will be boys, as in a boys will not be good humans, but let boys be boyish. Let them climb trees. Let them do boyish things. Let them run and learn with their hands and explore and experiment and be active and on their feet instead of tying them down to desks for 6 or 7 or 8 hours a day and expecting them to learn in a cattle car system that is often is most attuned to highly intelligent girls. Let them move and wiggle and run and chase and wrestle and rough and tumble. Let them be boys. Let them test their masculinity and their strength. Teach boys to express and own their emotions. Insist on a standard of empathy and compassion and kindness, no matter the gender of our children. Boys as much as girls. And when boys roughhouse and come blasting through and they're not acting like gentlemen and they're not being aware of the emotions of people around them, draw them back and say, hey, look at her face. How did you just make him feel? What did you just do? How should you go repair your friendship or your relationship with your sibling or your friend or your teacher or whomever that was? Teach them how to be emotionally intelligent instead of emotionally stunted. And remind them constantly, ad nauseum, that the one person they must conquer in order to be truly powerful, manly men is themselves. If they can conquer the man inside, they can lead anyone else, however God leads them to do so, in whatever giftedness they have been given. But if they cannot conquer themselves, if they cannot conquer their tendencies to addiction, their obsessions, their interests, their selfishness, they will be left with only the option of feeling that they must conquer everyone else, and it will turn them into people who are emotionally isolated, potentially abusive, and lonely men. And that's not what we want for our boys. That's not what we want for our men. So, those are my thoughts for today's video. Thank you so much for all of you who came and hung out with me and sat and listened and engaged and talked. I love it. I love it. I love it. And I hope that we can all go and raise some good humans. How's that? See you next week.